Section 1. The feeling you can't speak. There is a silence inside you that doesn't come from peace. It comes from shame, and it's louder than any scream. You feel it in moments you don't name. When you stutter in front of someone attractive, when you cancel plans and lie about being sick because you couldn't bear to be seen, when you apologize for speaking up, or when you scroll through someone's perfect life online and instead of admiration, you feel a wave of self-loathing. That is shame, and you carry it like a second skin. Shame isn't guilt. Guilt says, I did something bad. Shame says, I am bad. It is the quiet belief that your very existence is somehow wrong, and left unexamined, it will haunt every relationship, sabotage every ambition, and drown every moment of joy. Why? Because shame doesn't just whisper, you're not enough. It screams, don't let them see who you are. This is where Carl Gustav Jung enters the conversation. Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist born in 1875, dedicated his life to exploring the unseen forces that move the soul. The unconscious, the shadow, the archetypes. He taught that much of our suffering is not just emotional but spiritual. We are divided from ourselves. His work was not about fixing people, but about integrating them. He believed we become whole by facing the parts of ourselves we've abandoned. And nowhere is that more relevant than when we talk about shame. Jung once said, shame is a soul-eating emotion. What does that mean? It means shame doesn't just hurt, it devours. It eats at your self-respect, your spontaneity, your vitality. It convinces you that your brokenness is your identity. And the more you try to fix it by pleasing, performing, or perfecting, the more it thrives. Let's be honest, you don't scroll for connection. You scroll to escape yourself. You don't over-apologize because you're polite. You do it because you're terrified of being misunderstood. You don't avoid conflict because you're peaceful. You avoid it because deep down, you're afraid you don't have the right to take up space. These aren't habits. They are symptoms of shame. And yet, you keep going. You keep smiling, nodding, performing. You become the version of you they'll accept. The polished one. The agreeable one. The quiet one. You do it because, somewhere deep inside, you believe the real you is too much, not enough, or both. But what if I told you that version you present isn't you? It's your mask, your defense, your coping mechanism. And that's exactly what Brené Brown, research professor and author, discovered in her decades of studying shame. Brown's work, especially her book Staring Greatly in the Gifts of Imperfection, exposed the truth we've all felt but couldn't name, that shame thrives in secrecy and dies in empathy. She writes, shame needs 3 things to grow: secrecy, silence, and judgment. In other words, the more you hide it, the more it controls you. So let me ask you, what are you still hiding? What part of you have you decided no one must ever see? What would happen if they knew? You see, shame isn't just psychological, it's physiological. Studies using fMRI scans have shown that when people feel shame, the same brain regions light up as when they experience physical pain. That means every time you shrink from being seen, your body feels it like a wound. But you don't remember this pain as pain. You remember it as a rule: be less, be better, be invisible. Jung didn't believe in denial. He believed in confrontation. His entire philosophy was built around the idea that wholeness only comes from integration by turning toward the pain, not away from it. He wrote, "What you resist not only persists, but will grow in size. You think ignoring your shame will make it go away, but all you're doing is feeding it. Every time you say, 'I'm fine,' when you're not, Every time you laugh at the joke that cuts too deep, every time you silence yourself to avoid rejection, the shame grows louder. So what do? You begin by naming it. Not with blame, not with a therapist's jargon, but with raw, uncomfortable honesty. You name the memory, the pattern, the story, the wound, because as Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. You'll think your fear of commitment is just who you are. You'll think your anxiety around friendships is just introversion. You'll think your tendency to sabotage love is just bad luck. But it's not fate, it's shame, and it's directing you. Brown says, the less we talk about shame, the more power it has over our lives. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about how you learned to hate your body before you understood what a body was for. Let's talk about how you shut down when someone raises their voice, because yelling once meant danger. Let's talk about how you'd rather be alone than risk being known, because being known means being judged. And judgment? That's your greatest fear. But here's the truth. Shame is not your identity. It's a reaction to a wound, and wounds can heal. So ask yourself, are you tired yet? Tired of pretending? Tired of apologizing for your existence? Tired of being a prisoner to the voice that says, you're not lovable? You don't have to stay there. Carl Jung gave you the roadmap. Brené Brown gave you the flashlight. Now it's time for you to walk the path. You can start right now. You don't have to share your whole story. Just pick one moment, one truth, and say it out loud. Write it, whisper it, confess it. Name the shame, and you start taking away its power. Because shame cannot survive being seen. It cannot survive being understood. And it certainly cannot survive being loved. You are not your mistake. You are not your trauma. You are not your silence. You are the one who lived through it and survived. So stand at the edge of your silence and speak. Section 2. The mask you think is you. You learn to hide before you learn to speak. Long before you understood what shame was, you felt its shape. It didn't arrive with words. It arrived with looks, with silence, with withdrawal, with the coldness in someone's eyes when you were too loud, too sensitive, too wild, too much, or maybe it was subtler. Praise that only came when you performed. Love that felt conditional. Safety that had a price. Behave, impress, belong. So you adapted. You became who they needed you to be. You read the room. You swallowed the truth. You said I'm good when your chest was collapsing under anxiety. You smiled because you learned that showing pain made people uncomfortable. You performed because you believed love had to be earned. Carl Jung called this false self the persona, the mask we construct to fit into society, to be accepted, to be approved of. It's not inherently wrong. You need a persona to function. You can't walk into work and bleed your soul. But the problem comes when you forget that it's a mask, when you believe the performance is the person. Jung wrote, "The persona is that which in reality one is not, but which oneself and others think one is." The moment you forget that difference, that gap between who you are and what you present, shame enters. Because now, any crack in the mask feels like a threat to your worth. A bad day becomes a personal failure. A rejection becomes confirmation that the real you was never lovable. You live in fear of being exposed, and it gets worse. The longer you wear the mask, the less you remember what's beneath it. Brené Brown describes this as armoring up. In her research on shame, she found that we protect ourselves from shame by armoring with perfectionism, with numbing, with cynicism, with judgment. She writes, "Perfectionism is not the path that leads us to our gifts and to our sense of purpose, it's the armor. Think about that. What you thought was your strength, your excellence, your control, your reliability might actually be your fear dressed in discipline. You're not calm. You're emotionally frozen. You're not strong. You're unreachable. You're not productive. You're terrified of stillness, because that's when the shame speaks. So let me ask you this. Who would you be without the mask? Would you even recognize yourself? Maybe not. Because shame made sure you never developed that self. You only developed what was rewarded. You only grew what felt safe. And the rest? The wild parts? The messy parts? The vulnerable parts? You buried them. You became agreeable instead of honest, successful instead of free, busy instead of alive. Why? Because shame taught you that authenticity was dangerous. And now you wonder why you feel so empty. Jung's psychology wasn't just about illness, it was about soul. He believed that every symptom was a message from the psyche. Anxiety, depression, addiction, these weren't problems to eliminate. They were signals. And one of the clearest signals of the soul's suffering is this: chronic inauthenticity. If you've ever said, "I don't know who I am anymore," that's the soul knocking. If you've ever achieved something great and still felt numb, that's the persona cracking. If you've ever felt exhausted by people-pleasing but terrified to stop, that's the armor crushing your spirit. And here's the irony: the more you rely on your mask, the more fragile your identity becomes, because you've outsourced your worth. You've handed the mirror to the world and asked it to tell you who you are. You've made your self-image a hostage to others' approval. And approval is never consistent. One compliment lifts you. One critique destroys you. One cold glance at a party ruins your night. That's not identity, that's dependency. Brown puts it simply: fitting in is not belonging. Fitting in is assessing a situation and becoming who you need to be. Belonging doesn't require us to change who we are. It requires us to be who we are. Let that sink in. Belonging isn't earned through performance. It's revealed through presence. And shame, when it's unacknowledged, will keep you chasing belonging while never letting you feel it. Let's take a closer look. You over-explain yourself in texts. Why? Because you fear misunderstanding more than you value peace. You preemptively reject people you like. Why? Because if you reject first, you never risk feeling not good enough. You make jokes about your flaws so no one else can point them out. Why? Because you'd rather humiliate yourself than be vulnerable to someone else's judgment. These aren't quirks. These are defense mechanisms, shame's last line of defense. And while they keep you safe, they also keep you small. So here's the truth you need to hear. The mask may have protected you as a child, but now it's suffocating you. You cannot heal while pretending to be someone else. And you cannot be loved unless you're willing to be seen. Brown writes, "Vulnerability is not weakness. It's our most accurate measure of courage." What would it look like to stop performing? What would it feel like to let someone see your fear and stay anyway? What would it mean to be accepted not for your mask, but for your mess? It would feel like coming home, because the self you've been hiding, the scared, shame-filled, tender self, is not your failure. It's your foundation. Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming whole, required us to confront everything we've rejected, to reclaim the parts we abandoned, to stop being someone else's idea of good and start being fully, messily, honestly ourselves. He said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, but it's also the most liberating. So ask yourself now, where am I wearing a mask? What is it costing me? What would I risk if I took it off? What would I gain? And then decide today to lower it, even slightly. Tell the truth in a conversation. Don't laugh when it's not funny. Admit you're tired. Say no without explanation. Let someone hold you, not the polished version of you, but the real, cracked, beautiful self beneath. Because the longer you wear the mask, the longer you delay your healing. And healing begins the moment you stop pretending. Section 3. The shadow that grows in silence. There is a part of you that you don't talk about. Not because it doesn't matter, but because it matters too much. It's the jealousy you felt when your friend got what you wanted. It's the rage you buried so deep you started calling it stress. It's the desire you never named because it didn't match your identity. It's the memory you silence before it speaks. And yet, it's still there, whispering behind your smile, twitching beneath your control, waiting behind your perfection. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the unconscious part of your psyche that holds everything you repress, deny, and disown. Not just your vices, but your pain, your wildness, your trauma, your unmet needs, your disallowed truths. And here's the secret: shame is the gatekeeper of the shadow. Shame tells you don't look there. Shame says that part of you is unworthy. Shame insists if anyone sees that, they'll leave, so you lock it away. But Jung warned us, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Your healing is not in the light you chase. It's in the darkness you refuse to face. And that's where the shadow grows, in silence, in secrecy, in self-denial. You think ignoring it will keep you safe, but it doesn't stay buried. The shadow finds other ways to speak, through your triggers, your addictions, your nightmares, your sabotage. Ever lash out and then wonder, where did that come from? That's the shadow. Ever ghost someone for no reason and feel sick after? That's the shadow. Ever find yourself stuck in the same kind of toxic relationship over and over again? That's not bad luck. That's the shadow trying to teach you something. Brené Brown says, shame corrodes the very part of us that believes we are capable of change. When shame is bound to the shadow, it doesn't just make us feel broken, it convinces us we're unfixable. It tells us that part of you isn't just painful, it's permanent. But that's a lie, and a lie thrives in silence. Brown discovered that people who build resilience to shame don't do it by pretending it's not there. They do it by building empathy first toward others, then toward themselves. You don't heal the shadow by eliminating it. You heal it by listening to it. Jung's process of individuation was all about this: integration, the acceptance of all your parts, even the dark ones, especially the dark ones, because that's where your power lives. That's where your creativity, your passion, your truth are hidden beneath the shame you were taught to feel. Let's break this down. You're not anxious in every room because you're shy. You're anxious because part of you is convinced that being fully seen equals being humiliated. You're not addicted to busyness because you love productivity. You're addicted to distraction because stillness brings up feelings you've buried for years. You're not a perfectionist because you want things to be good. You're a perfectionist because somewhere along the way, mistakes got tied to unlovable. This is the shadow in action, and it's exhausting. You don't just manage your tasks, you manage your image. You curate every text. You soften your truth. You downplay your dreams. You apologize for your needs. Why? Because your shadow learned that expression equals exposure, and exposure equals shame. Jung warned, the greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parents, and often your shadow contains not just your shame, but inherited shame. The things your family didn't talk about, the grief they suppressed, the rules they never questioned. You are carrying legacies of silence. But here's the gift of Jung's work. He believed that the shadow, when integrated, doesn't just make you whole. It makes you wise. the parts of you that feel most shameful. They're your compass. That rage you suppress. It might point to boundaries you need. That envy you ignore. It might reveal desires you haven't allowed yourself to want. That sadness you numb. It might hold truths you've been afraid to accept. So instead of banishing the shadow, you learn to dialogue with it. Brown says, the most powerful stories may be the ones we tell ourselves, but beware, they're usually fiction. And shame is a master storyteller. It tells you you're too sensitive, too broken, too late, too much. But you get to revise the story, not by erasing the pain, by listening to it, by giving it space, by rewriting it with truth. Let me ask you, what part of you are you still afraid to look at? What memory still makes you clench your jaw? What emotion do you shame in yourself when you see it in others? What truth have you buried because it didn't match who you thought you were supposed to be? You can't outrun the shadow, but you can learn to walk with it. You can hold it, name it, even thank it for keeping you safe, even in the wrong ways. And slowly, with compassion, you can begin the alchemy of integration. Because the shadow is not your enemy, it's your twin. And when you shame it, you shame yourself. But when you honor it, you begin to become whole. So here's your call to action. Sit with your story. Don't flinch. Don't edit. Don't justify. Just sit. Listen. Feel. Speak. Speak what you've been too afraid to say. To someone. To a journal. To yourself. Because silence protects shame and voice dissolves it. Jung believed the psyche had a deep, organic drive toward wholeness, toward selfhood, toward light but through the dark. So stop running from the parts of you that don't look good in daylight. Run toward them, meet them, and invite them home. Section 4. The Alchemy of Exposure. You've spent most of your life believing that if they saw the real you, they'd leave. So you covered up, armored up. You learned to anticipate rejection before it arrived. You kept the mess quiet. You made yourself small. But no matter how good you got at hiding, shame stayed. And it whispered, not enough, never enough. Carl Jung knew that silence doesn't save us, it splits us. He taught that we do not heal by becoming more acceptable, we heal by becoming more whole. And wholeness starts where you least expect it, in exposure. It begins the moment you say what you've never said. The moment you show the wound instead of the bandage. The moment you let someone see your truth, not your costume. Shame cannot survive empathy, writes Brené Brown. It withers in light. It dies in presence. But this is where most people turn back. Because exposure feels like death. It feels like standing naked in front of the firing squad. And shame says, you won't survive this. But you will. Because the moment you tell the truth and survive it, the lie begins to crumble. The lie that said, you're only worthy for the lie that said, you have to earn belonging. The lie that said, you are alone in this. Here's the truth Jung gave us. Wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration. You don't become yourself by removing your flaws. You become yourself by accepting them, even the ones that still make you flinch. This is what Jung called individuation, the sacred, lifelong process of becoming yourself, not a persona, not a projection, not a defense mechanism, but you, in your full paradox, messy and majestic, imperfect and worthy, shadowed and sacred. And this is what Brené Brown called wholehearted living, a life led not by the hustle for approval, but by the courage to be real. Let's make it tangible. You feel ashamed of your body? Speak it. You feel ashamed of your story? Tell it. You feel ashamed of your fear. Sit with it, because the shame only owns you when it's silent. Brown writes, owning our story and loving ourselves through that process is the bravest thing that we will ever do. It's not about telling everyone everything. It's about telling someone something. It's about cracking the door where shame kept you locked in. It's about choosing to be seen, just once, just enough so your nervous system learns, I can be known and still be loved. And when that happens, you don't just heal, you change. You become. Jung said, I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become. You are not the silence that was forced on you. You are not the shame that wrapped itself around your voice. You are not the mask you built out of fear. You are the one who survived it. And now, you are the one who is rewriting it. So ask yourself now, who do you become when no one is watching? What does your voice sound like when it's not filtered through fear? What does your truth look like when it's not sanded down for others? This is the alchemy. Shame becomes strength. Silence becomes story. Exposure becomes rebirth. And no, it won't always feel good. Growth rarely does. But it will feel real. And real is what your soul has been begging for. Let me offer you this metaphor. Shame is like mold. It grows in darkness. But bring it into the light and it dies. So here is your invitation. Let someone in. Let yourself speak. Let the pain breathe, not as a confession, but as a resurrection. Not as a weakness, but as a rite of passage. This is your turning point. The place where the story shifts. Where the mask drops. Where you step out of the costume, the script, the shadow, and into yourself. This isn't the end of your healing. It's the beginning of your sovereignty. You are no longer ruled by performance. You are no longer addicted to apology. You are no longer seduced by silence. Because now you know shame only has power when you believe it's truth, but it's not. It's just a story, and you are the author now. Brown says, you either walk inside your story and own it, or you stand outside your story and hustle for your worthiness. So stop hustling. Start owning. Start walking. Walk into your past with compassion. Walk into your relationships without shrinking. Walk into your future without a mask. Because the moment you say, this is who I am, and the world doesn't fall apart, you are reborn. This is the real alchemy. Not gold from lead, but peace from pain. Selfhood from shame. Life from the places you were told to hide. So go, not polished, not perfect, but whole. Because you are no longer becoming what the world demands. You are becoming who you truly are, and that, as Jung said, is the privilege of a lifetime.